As I started to write this book, I became more and more excited because everything was sort of falling into place. And I made what I consider three important discoveries, radical discoveries, about the nature of mastery. Discovery of where it comes from, the source of it, how you get there, the process that leads to it, and the nature of creative energy and or high-level intuition, which is sort of the end game of mastery itself. So all of my books have kind of iconic figures, like for power it was Machiavelli, for war it was Napoleon. The icon of this book, and to me the greatest master who ever lived, is Leonardo da Vinci. And the thing about Leonardo da Vinci is he's sort of associated with this almost superhuman power. I mean, how else can you explain his achievements except for the fact that he was gifted with some kind of freakish talent? Well, in my research and going deeply into him, I found that it's not the case at all. He's an extremely human person. His power is very explicable. So Da Vinci was born as the illegitimate son of this Florentine, a notary who worked in Florence. And as an illegitimate son, he was not allowed to attend university or pursue any of the noble professions such as medicine or law. So he was basically this wild, unschooled child who grew up in the town of Vinci. And as this child who was on his own, his favorite thing to do was to wander through the countryside, and he would go in particular to this very sort of primitive part of the landscape where there are all of these rock formations and really fast-moving streams and all this wildlife with swans and boars. He was fascinated by this landscape. It was so dramatic. And one day, when he was maybe 8 or 9 years old, he snuck into his father's office and he stole some paper. And in those days, paper was a very rare commodity. And it just so happened that as a notary, he had a lot of paper. And he took this paper and he went into this wild part of the forest that he was so attracted to. And he started to draw what he saw. He started to draw flowers and animals and streams and the rocks and everything. So he started to draw it. Now, you might think, well, what's the big deal about that? But really, it was an extremely peculiar thing for a young boy to do, because in those days, the only thing really that people drew were human figures that particularly had a religious significance. To actually draw flowers and plants and landscape and rocks was something nobody did. There was something peculiar already about this boy when he's 8 or 9 years old. So he starts to do this a lot. And he doesn't have any teachers. He just draws what he sees, and he gets better and better at it. He gets so good that his father sees his drawings, and he's completely impressed. And he gets Leonardo a position as an apprentice in one of the most important studios in Florence with the artist Verrocchio. So this young 14-year-old boy begins his apprenticeship. And in this apprenticeship, he obviously has a lot to learn, and he has to sort of Leonardo is sort of a rebel by nature, but he has to learn to subsume all of that and learn all the various skills. And as it turns out, he is by far the most diligent student in that studio. He takes practice to another extreme. When they have this exercise where they put a room full of chairs and they drape fabric over it, and you have to practice getting the folds of fabric, Leonardo would stay after the class and move lights in different places so he could capture the different angles and how the creases might be depicted with different light sources. He had an obsessive personality. As he goes further into this apprenticeship, he starts to initiate his own exercises and experiments. He starts walking through the streets of Florence and drawing the people as they're walking by, and he goes into churches and into brothels and into prisons and drawing people's faces. He decided that he would be the first person to paint realistic angel wings. So he went to the marketplace and he purchased all of these birds, and he sat there for hours drawing the wings of the birds. Then he would let the birds go free. And finally he did paint wings that really literally looked like they grew out of the back of the angel. Oh, and then after that, of course, now that he learned about birds, he kind of became obsessed with birds, and he went in and started studying aviation, which led him to want to learn how to fly, to building a flying machine. His mind kind of worked like that. Now, after he leaves Verrocchio's studio, Leonardo continues to be this weirdo. The path for an artist normally was quite a servile one. You were basically a hired hand. Some aristocrat would commission you to do a portrait of the mistress or the queen or whomever, and you were sort of at their mercy. And they were notoriously lax in paying you. It was a pretty demeaning job at times. And Leonardo hated any kind of rules or lack of control. So he devised a completely novel career path. He decided to immerse himself in the study of engineering, civil and military engineering, in hydraulics, in all sorts of sciences and architecture, in painting as well, and sculpture. And basically, if you wanted Leonardo to work for you, you had to hire him as someone who was a part of your court. And he would have almost like a yearly stipend to be part of your court, and then he would do all of these different activities for you. And later on, he actually got this position with the Duke of Milan and the King of France. Now, if you could go inside of this man's brain for a moment, you would see that this is someone with this incredible willfulness. Everything he touches, he turns into his own thing. And the thing about it is that it's not this comes from the superhuman genius at all. All of that power came from a person who simply worked harder, who was so obsessed with detail that he put in hours that nobody else would think of. And in fact, Leonardo's motto for his life was ostinato rigore, which means relentless rigor. This man had relentless rigor. When he attacked a problem, that was it, and he would spend all of his hours of his life doing that. Now, I think that he, for me, represents the fundamental lesson of mastery and everything else that I wrote about. I maintain, or it's not I maintain, it's the truth. Every human being is born unique. Each one of you was born with a DNA and a configuration of your brain that has never happened before in history and will never happen in the future. This uniqueness that you have is manifested in your early years when you're a child by the fact that you're drawn. It could be physical activity like a dance or sports. It could be something more intellectual like math, or it could be music, or it could just be as simple as a young boy who's drawn to nature and wants to capture it realistically with a piece of paper. Whatever it is, it's a sign that you are drawn to this thing in a way that's pre-verbal, you can't even explain. And that is the manifestation of your uniqueness. And I compare this uniqueness that each one of you has to a voice that's inside of your head. It's telling you, you should be doing this, you should be doing this. It's what fits you, it's what you're good at. But what happens with all of us as you get older is that voice gets weaker and weaker. You listen to your parents who say you need to be a doctor or a lawyer, you need to worry about making money, You listen to peers who are saying, this is a cool job, this is the kind of profession you should be going into. You start thinking in terms of what really matters is I have to be comfortable, I have to look for a position that's comfortable. To the point where you could graduate from college, you could be in your early 20s, and you have no idea who you are. That voice is totally drowned out. And you end up going on a career path that seems right. You're going to make money. It's all, everything's figured out. And in your 20s, you can kind of fake your way through it because you're young, you're energetic, you're smart and everything. But what ends up happening as you get older is you're not so engaged with that subject. You're not learning it as deeply as other people. You're not really focusing as much as you can. And by the 40s, something very dangerous can happen. You could be made redundant. Someone else comes along who's younger and cheaper than you. And now you're pretty much screwed because you haven't built up the skills that you needed to build up to adjust your career. Well, masters, like Leonardo, are people who hear that voice and they hear it so strongly that they stay true to it throughout the course of their life. You could draw a line from that 8-year-old boy to the 64-year-old man who's on his deathbed. That doesn't mean that they take wrong paths, that sometimes the voice goes away a little bit and they try something that doesn't suit them. That happens, but they hear it again, they find their way back to that path, and they continue all the way to the end of their life. What this means, and now I call this your vocation, that voice literally means voice, or your life's task. This was what you were meant to do in life. It's that seed that was planted at birth in your uniqueness. Because what happens when you know your life's task and you pursue it, in those early years of entering your field, you are so deeply engaged in it, you're so curious for its own sake that you pay greater attention, you learn faster, you enter what I call the cycle of accelerated returns. When you're excited and you learn something, now the practice becomes more pleasurable and you practice harder. And as you practice harder, it gets more pleasurable and you practice harder and harder and harder until it's like generating a motor and you have a very intense apprenticeship. And by the end of your career, or 10 or 20 or 30 years down the line, what you're able to do is so unique, it is such a reflection of your individuality that you have realized that seed that was planted at your birth. Now, I think the greatest danger that all of you face in your careers, and particularly in this weird world that we're all, is that you're basically going to be replaceable. That's the fate that most people have. You learn a trade, you learn it well, and you reach a point where somebody younger and cheaper can do what you can do, and you better believe that somebody younger and cheaper will take your place. So the game of life, if it is a game, the end game is to be irreplaceable. You're one of a kind. You're original. There's nobody who can replace you, just as there's nobody who can replace Leonardo da Vinci. There's no one else like Napoleon Bonaparte. There's no one else like Steve Jobs. I know these are huge figures that are larger than life, but even on smaller levels and people I deal with in the business world, I can generally say that if they're masters, there's nobody else that can take their place. And that is the ultimate position of power in this world, and that's what everybody in here should eventually aim at. And the thing about Leonardo that I think is so relevant for now is that what he wanted to do, what was deep inside of him, his spirit, it wasn't one field. He didn't feel like he just wanted to do art. He didn't feel like he wanted to do just science. He wanted to mix all of these things into something that reflected his unique spirit, which is what he wanted to do. That is the fate that you have because you live in this world where with the click of a button, you have access to the kind of information that would take him 2 or 3 years to begin to have access to. You have the power now to pursue these many different skills, acquire as many skills as you can in your 20s, and combine them in a way that suits you and your uniqueness into some kind of niche, a career path that expresses this uniqueness. Now, there's a quote, this French philosopher, Baron de Montesquieu, a political philosopher from the 18th century that I kind of like, and it goes as follows. We have 3 educations in our life. The first is from our parents, the second is from our schoolmasters, and the third is from the world. And the third education contradicts all that we learn from the first 2. And basically, what it means, eat it with experiences, with study, with research, with practice, the more the brain can naturally make all of these associations and connections between this and that. And if you were to look into the brain of a chess master or a great jazz artist or somebody who excels at a sport or anything like that, you would see in that brain all of these neural pathways that go off in 1,000,000 different directions. It's like this rich ecosystem, and all of these different pathways can connect up. That is what true creativity is. That the brain awakens naturally with creative energy. It starts to associate things and connect things that had never been connected before because you fed it with all of this stuff. So when things first happen and they're bad, I beat myself up. for several weeks, but it only lasts for several weeks, and then I pick myself back up. So be patient and understand that right after something bad, you're going to be depressed. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to feel bad about yourself, to even blame yourself, but you're going to pick yourself up and be patient about it, you know?
Yeah.
It's a process. You pay a price for repressing your emotions. That repressing something eventually comes out. And the great psychologist Carl Jung, he was the one who kind of studied that in great depth. When you repress, for instance, your dark side or your dark emotions, they come out in other ways, right? So trying to always like present yourself as this very stoic person when in fact you're not, you're going to pay a price for it. It's going to come out in ways you can't control, right? There's going to be a negative consequences to that. On the other hand, you don't want to be this person who's constantly emoting and telling everybody what you feel like. It's very irritating. You have no self-control and people are judging you. You look like this weak person who can't control your own tongue. You can't control it. Okay? So I compare it in my books and in talks to the metaphor of the rider and the horse, right? So the rider of the horse is your rational brain. And the horse is your emotion. It's the animal part of you. It's what makes you angry or excited or fearful. The rider is what makes you kind of, you know, get things done.
Yeah.
If the rider on that horse, I don't know if people have ridden a horse, I used to ride a lot when I was a kid. If you hold the reins too tightly, if you're trying to control the horse and repress it, the horse feels it. It feels it in the way your thighs are constricting it. Horses are very sensitive animals, right? And it won't do anything. It won't follow any of your instructions. It won't go anywhere. Or it will freak out and it will run far away and it'll throw you off the horse. But if you just let the horse go anywhere, the horse also feels that. The horse has been tamed to some extent. Because this guy I have no respect for him, right? He's not trying to do anything. And the horse will go wherever it wants. You have no control. People who know how to ride horses, they know they have to have a balance. You have to hold the reins, not too tightly, but you have to be able to guide the horse. You have to squeeze with the thighs, but not too tightly. The horse, you have to feel relaxed and one with the horse then gives in, and you can go anywhere. So you want a balance in life. You want to be able to understand your emotions, right? You want to be able to understand why you're angry, why you're fearful, why you're frustrated, and not just give into the emotion, like let the horse go anywhere. So that maybe next time you understand, well, maybe I don't need to feel anger or fear because it's not really related to anything. So you have a balance. You understand the horse, the emotion, and you can control it to some degree, but not over control it or repress it. But then you can use your anger for other things like writing a book, right, et cetera, or believing in some social cause that's important, et cetera. So it's a balance.
Okay, so law number one, never outshine the master, was the law that you were really leaning into pre-stroke. Is there one post-stroke that you think about that sticks to you more, that connects to you in a different way now?
Yeah, I would say assume formlessness, which is law number 48. So that's why I said the symmetry.
Ooh, look at you. I like this.
And that's all about kind of being fluid and adapting to circumstances and never having like a concrete form. It's a very military law. Comes from Sun Tzu, and like the perfect army doesn't have a form. You can't figure out where they are, what their strategy is. Their strategy has no form. Or the great swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, who said that, you know, nobody ever knew what my strategy would be. I was completely formless. So it's a way of being very fluid in life and very open, and never doing the same thing twice and adapting your what you do to the circumstances around you. And when you have a stroke, you know, it's not easy to do that, right? Because your body certainly isn't capable of being fluid. So your mind has to be fluid. I have to retrain myself from not getting stuck in certain ideas and certain patterns of thinking, certain negative things and certain frustrations and certain ways of looking at the world. I have to be fluid and take each day as it comes and adapt myself to this new body that I have. So I think about that law a lot.
You have an interesting approach, which is you have this kind of dark side of looking at how humans are, but you believe that we can be taught for good. in the end. Can you talk a little bit more about that philosophy?
Well, yeah, so many of the qualities, each chapter is basically on a very elemental part of human nature, and there's sort of a negative spin to them. So, for instance, the first chapter is about irrationality, the second chapter is about narcissism, there's chapters about envy, grandiosity, and these are elements that are kind of wired into our nature, into our animal nature, that go back hundreds of thousands of years to our origins as a species. But they're not really the things that created us in our prehistory are not really very relevant to the 21st century. So, for instance, the fact that we're basically emotional animals. We tend to think of ourselves as rational, as intellectual, that we think first, that thinking is the most important element of human nature. But I'm saying no, it's our emotions that govern most of our behavior. And our inability to understand where our emotions come from and why we're feeling a particular way causes us a lot of problems. So I want to turn this around. I want you to become aware of these kind of shadowy, dark elements that lurk in your unconscious, that lurk at other people. And by becoming aware of them, you can turn it around. So, for instance, the fact that emotions tend to govern our behavior, and it's something that's been demonstrated by economists, for instance, who look at our behavior when we purchase products and how they call this the affective heuristic, that most of our choices in purchasing things are not based on rational thinking processes, but on very primal emotions, which is what marketing people use to manipulate us very well. And so by becoming aware of your own predisposition to react emotionally to things, you can begin to correct that. You can begin to become more aware. You can begin to see what governs your behavior. And then you can start to become more rational in your choices, in your decisions in life. But only if you become aware of the fact that you are essentially irrational can you begin to turn that around. Only if you become aware that you are essentially self-absorbed and narcissistic. And I make the point that we like to point our fingers and say, oh, it's the other person who's a narcissist. He or she's aggressive. He or she, they're envious, etc. But I'm trying to say, no, we all share the same nature. We all have these sort of dark tendencies. And it's only by recognizing this in yourself can you begin to change it. Can you begin to turn that irrationality into rationality? You can begin to turn that self-absorption that we are all basically have into what I call empathy, which is the opposite. So the first thing is basically an act of humility to say, I have these issues and I want to change. I want to be a better person. I want to be more effective. I want to have better strategies. I want to deal with people better. I've made mistakes. And the thing is, people think that I'm this sort of all-powerful person who wrote these books. I wrote the 48 Laws of Power, etc. And in writing the book, The Laws of Human Nature, I had to come to terms with the fact that me, the writer, I have these qualities. I am irrational. I can be very self-absorbed and narcissistic. I can be prone to feeling envy, etc. So with that first step, then the door opens up. And now you can start taking other steps. You can start observing your behavior in action. So for instance, you might want to go through a review process and go look at your past and take like a traumatic experience in your work history, or perhaps you were fired or punished and you don't really know why, or you think somebody else was to blame, or it's unfair. Go back and analyze that and see if you can think now with some distance whether there might be a seed in there that you planted in your own behavior, in your own attitude. Not to say that you're completely to blame, but what was the role that you played with your own actions, your own psychology, your own attitude, and analyze that. And then try and notice if there are patterns in your life. Everybody has patterns. That is one of the chapters in the book, Law Number 4, about compulsive behavior. You'll notice that when you make mistakes, like if you make wrong choices in personal relationships, you tend to make the same wrong choices over and over again. So notice certain patterns in the past
and begin to understand that that pattern isn't because of the gods, messing with your mind. It's coming from somewhere within. And now, with these sort of an analyzing of yourself, you can begin to understand yourself better and see what might have caused these problems in the past. And that's the only way that you can get out of some of these bad patterns. I could go on and on each chapter, have more advice about how to become more self-aware. A very important element is the ability to analyze your own emotions. That's something you can start to do tomorrow. So you notice it's best to start with powerful emotions like anger. Okay, all of us experience anger in this world and frustration, right? And you'll notice when you're feeling it, you'll tend to blame or externalize it. Oh, that person said something, or they did something, or they messed with me, and that's why I'm angry. And I want you to take a step back, and I want you to see, where does your anger really come from? Does it come from what that person said or did? Or might it have started earlier in the day when somebody else different, like your spouse or your children, or someone else said something that got under your skin, and you're carrying that with you, and then somebody crosses your path and you get angry, but it's not them, it's something prior, or maybe it's something in your past, or maybe it's something in your childhood. So don't just react emotionally and just assume that your anger or your depression or your frustration is real. You have the ability to analyze and see that maybe it's coming from within, and maybe you're the source of it. And with that ability to analyze yourself, it's actually one of the most important life skills that you can develop, the ability to look at yourself with a bit of distance and see and analyze why you're feeling a particular way. Those are some of the tips that I would give for beginning this process.